Hello and very welcome back to Wildlife Girl Stories and my lovely reading wrap-up for January. In the end, I ended up reading 4 books or finishing 4 books and reading 1 magazine in January. This one is the magazine, as you can see right here. And I, of course, have set up nice little pages for all of the books that I read. So in today's video, I'm gonna go through these pages with you and show you the sped up version of my page setups while I tell you something about the books that I read and which ones I liked. Spoiler, I liked all of them, and which ones I would recommend for whom. So I hope you enjoy that part because that's gonna be the main part of today's video. And afterwards, we will go through my first few pages of my journal and look at my goal progress. And also, at the end of the video, I will do a little preview for what's gonna happen in February and what you can look forward to. So I hope that sounds great, and let's jump back into the past and see what the first book was that I read this year. So, looking back at my January page quite a bit earlier in the month, you can see that I've already started on 3 things right down there in my tracker. And the first one that I actually finished for January is a second part of the series, and that is A Gathering of Shadows by V.E. Schwab. I actually read the first part, which is A Darker Shade of Magic, in July last year, which was the first book that I ever read by this author, and I really enjoyed it. It was an immediate 5 stars read for me. And so I knew I had to read the second part as well. But as it often is with library books, it wasn't available right then because they only have 1 copy, so it did take me a bit to actually get the book. Now, you can watch me set up a nice journaling page for it, and you can see me pick 2 shades of red because that makes a lot of sense in terms of the book itself and the setting of the book. So while I set up this page, let me talk to you about the story for a bit. If you don't know the first part of the trilogy, Darker Shade of Magic, it is obviously, as the title suggests, a fantasy book that includes a different magic system. And the cool part about it is the setting. So there are 4 different parallel worlds, and all of these worlds share one city, which is London. And our main character, Kel, is from Red London, which is a London that has quite a bit of magic, but is still pretty secure. People are happy. And he was raised as part of the royal family in this London and is one of the few people that actually can travel between the different worlds. So the other worlds are a grey London, which is even further away from the source of magic and thus has almost no magic left and is pretty much an industrial times version of maybe our London, to be honest. And then there is White London, which is on the other side of Red London, basically, and is closer to the source of magic. So there's a lot more magic in White London. But that also means that they have misused the magic quite a bit, so life there isn't necessarily as nice as it might be in Red London. And then there is Black London, which is the one that actually got destroyed by overuse of magic and is basically only a wasteland at this point. And the story takes us into something happening to Kel as he finds a weird artifact that just seems to bring some parts of bad magic into the world. And as he is struggling with that situation, he meets Lila, who is actually a thief and from Grey London, and she ends up being not quite his sidekick, but being his helper, and they develop a really nice friendship. So in the second part, that I won't tell you too much about because I don't want to spoil the ending of the first one, of course. In the second part, you will find out more about both of these characters, because you end up following first Lila and later Cal as well through what happens in the aftermath of the big ending of the first book. And it's really nice to get to know these characters even better. And I liked them in the first part already. And in the second part, it was such fun to get back to these people and see how they interact in a different way. And sometimes you don't quite, I didn't quite agree with what Lila was doing and how she was acting, but it makes sense for her character, and I always like that in a book. So it is a really good series. The characters are very well thought out and very well told. And if you like magic and you haven't read anything by V.E. Schwab, I would definitely recommend it, because it is a fun magic system. Especially in the second book, there is some kind of tournament happening, and there's a lot of fighting with magic going on, and the magic system gets developed even further than the first book. And it is a really, really good fantasy book, and I immensely enjoyed it. And apart from the story, what I also enjoyed quite a bit was that we got to see a few more characters in more depth. So Cal has a brother, Rai, that we didn't get to see that much of in the first book, but he did become important a bit later on. And in the second book, he is playing much more of a major role, and their friendship and the way they interact is a huge part of character development for Cal, I think. So that was really nice to see. And also for Lila, she gets a new friend, Alucard, who is a captain and who ran away from the city at some point and now returns because of the tournament. So there's a lot of different characters that get to interact with each other. We have more characters being set up probably for the third part. And I can't wait to read the final part of this trilogy. And it would be amazing if this would actually end up being a full 5-star trilogy. So far it's looking great, because both the first and the second book got 5 stars from me. So I'm really looking forward to the third one. And luckily, the library hold is only about 2 more weeks. So I should be able to at least start it in January. And probably I can tell you later on in the video if that worked out or not. Anyways, since we have now set up the nice little page for this book, I think we can move on to my different reading challenges and see how it fits in there. The first page that gets to be changed by reading this book is my goal overview, because of course this book counts to reading the 60 books that I want to read this year. So let's tick off this box. And we can also see that it's not one of my priority reads, because I tend to not keep series in there if I can. The second page that we get to set up is my tracker, so my bookshelves. I've already prepared a few empty books so that it's easier to fill in the books that I read. And I'm doing a color tracker for different months as well as the different types of books. So on that timeline poster that I am currently putting my finger on, you can already guess that January is going to be a blue month because it's cold and it's winter, and that makes sense for me. And I have set up physical, ebook, and audiobook colors so that I can tell them apart on a glance, at least, and still get to track months and types as well. So let me just fill in this little coloring book, and that's my first book done on the shelves for this year, which is amazing at 5 stars. I'm really happy that that worked out so well. Great. So the next spread that we get to look at is, of course, my book bingo, which has 2 parts to it. In the first bingo, which is the diversity of different types of books, I chose to put this book down as the second in a series because I want to read different parts of series and make sure that I continue series throughout. So this works out really well. I will probably read another book that is the second of a series. But for now, let's just put it in somewhere where it fits well, and I will surely find spaces to put the other books in as well. So I'm not worried about that just yet. Anyways, with the first bingo being set up now, we can move on to my second bingo. And the second one is more on the diversity of themes. I was considering which one to use here, and I have a few that would have worked because Lila is traveling on a ship for quite a while and thus is on the ocean. So I figured I might as well use the ocean one because I'm not sure how many books that I have already planned for the year are actually gonna happen on the ocean as well. So that sounded like a great idea. But with that said, we can move on even further. It doesn't fit into my monthly goals or quarterly goals because it's a library book and it's not something that I can put in there. And I don't want to do anything with the country or animal collection at the moment because that will take a lot longer to set up and paint out. So I will do that summertime. But we can also add in author and book title in my alphabet challenge. And with V.E. Schwab, I figured a V is quite a rare letter to have in an author name, so I decided to use that rather than the E or the S, which are probably more common as well. For the titles, I chose to put it in G, as in gathering, because that's, again, the most uncommon letter that I figured is within the title. So that makes the first entries in this page as well. So this was the normal setup that we do for every book, of course, but as this is part of a series that I'm currently reading, we can tick that off as well. And that's it. We're all good, all done with this book. And I'll hand it back over to the future. And here in the future, we're gonna jump around just a little bit because it makes a lot more sense for you guys listening. So I actually managed to get the third part of the series, A Conjuring of Light, from the library even before January ended. And I was able to complete it in January as well. It was my last book of January and I completed it on the 30th. So obviously there's not a huge chance of much happening after that. But still, because it's the third part of the series, I figured it would make more sense to talk about it right away. And the important part to mention is, it is the darkest one, the darkest book of the series, this third one, which is why this gets a bit more of a dark theme with a lot of black and grey and way less red than it had before, which makes sense in context of the book. But again, I don't want to spoil the storyline because there's literally not much that I can say about the third part that wouldn't spoil some stuff that happens in the first two parts. So I will keep this review quite short and just say it was just as amazing as part 1 and part 2. And this series is the complete 5-star series for me. If it sounds like something that you might be interested in, I would recommend you pick up the first book and just see if you can vibe with the way that V.E. Schwab writes, because I found it to be just amazing. And what I can say, and I will say it because it is quite important for me sometimes, is that this book is quite dark, but the ending is positive and hopeful. So if that's a thing that you look for in your fantasy books, then let me tell you, this ending is a nice one. You don't have to worry too much about your favorite characters, even though there are, of course, a few sacrifices and there is some loss discussed as well. So it still has a lot of depth to it, but it ends hopefully, and I think especially in times like these, we can really use that, and sometimes we just need a good book that ends nicely as well. And this is all that I'm gonna say about this book. And let's, with that, jump back into the past from my point of view. And because I've already, of course, put in the last 2 books that I've read, I don't want to go back with you and look through all the pages that I can tick off now, because I don't want to spoil the information for the other 2 books that I filmed before this. So we're just gonna keep that one tucked away for the end of this video, when we'll look at all the nice bingo spaces and ticks that I could do in this whole month. So with that said, let's go back to the past and to the second book that I read. Next up, let's look at the second book that I read this year, which is quite cool, not only this month, but also this year. That was Throne of Jade, which is the second part of the Temeraire series by Naomi Novik. And I started the series last year from the library, because I tend to do that if I don't know if I will like the books. And I enjoyed the first book so much. It was an instant 5 stars. And I really loved the way that they portrayed the dragons in this world and how the dragons changed the world. So it's basically a historical setting where you have an alternate history about the wars between England and Napoleon. And the dragons are quite an important part in how the countries interact and how the war is going. So yeah, that set up a nice page for this book. I chose more brownish, slightly red colors. As you can see, I have the cover lying on the side there, so that fits quite well. And I had to have something that has a lot of gold in it as well, because as they are being sent to China in this book, there is quite a lot of beautiful golden stuff happening in the later half. So I figured this would fit really well. But I also wanted to bring in some of the red tones, so that's why I made this spread up out of these colors. Anyways, as I was saying, Throne of Jade is the second book, so I can't tell you too much about the contents because I don't want to spoiler anything. And I think in this case I actually didn't do any spoilers in my written review as well, but just to be sure, I might write something that does do a bit of spoiling, because those are just my reviews for myself, so it makes sense for me to do that. So just take care if you want to read it. Don't read all of my reviews in this book. Anyways, it was one of the best books that I could have picked up this early in the year, and I'm starting the year really strong because it was an instant 5-star as well. I really loved going back into this world of dragons, and I'm really happy that I got the first 4 books of the series as a Christmas present from my family. So I can actually continue on with the series quite nicely now. I'm quite happy that I read this book so early in the year and that I was able to continue and go back into the world of these nice dragons, because it was just so much fun to read. And I really enjoyed the dynamic between the 2 main characters. So basically in the first book, a naval captain, Captain Lawrence, finds an egg and is basically forced to bond with the dragon inside, because of course they don't want to give up the dragon because dragons are rare. So as he does that, he has to give up his naval career and become an aviator instead, fly and fight on dragons. And by now he's gotten quite used to that job and that position. And he really has a great friendship with his dragon, Temeraire. And that's basically the 2 people, or the 2 characters that we follow. Obviously, the dragon's not a person. Anyways, those 2 have a great friendship and they really, really enjoy being with each other. So it's quite nice to see how they explore the world and learn about more new things in this book, because they were stationed in England in the first book and they did their training and everything, and some stuff happened, of course, which I can't tell you about. But in the second book they get sent on a journey to go to China and to actually do a diplomatic mission and ensure that China doesn't join the war on the other side. I wasn't expecting it to be quite that much of traveling, to be honest. I figured they would travel to China and then things would happen in China, but a lot of this book is actually traveling, which is great because I love ships, and especially like sailing ships, the old kind. And there was so much going on the ship during the journey. It was really, really a fun read. And I won't tell you much more about it. I will only say there's, of course, some fighting going on in there. And there's also quite a bit of politicking going on as well. So it does stay quite interesting. And what I enjoyed a lot about this series so far as well is it's set in historical times. So we're following a white man because that just makes sense on the setting, I suppose. But we also follow while this white man realizes that maybe women can actually serve in the military as well, and maybe that's not an issue, and maybe he has to look at women differently. And then also with the traveling to China and the whole trade happening there, in the beginning he's like, oh, of course Britain is so much better, but over time he gets to realize that there's quite a few good points about China as well, and about their culture, and they just do things differently, and not everything they do has to be bad. And so we kind of watch him grow and realize things that probably most people during this time wouldn't have realized. And I did enjoy that quite a lot. And the best thing about it is that the dragon, which obviously he just hatched, I don't know, a few months ago during this timeline, and he's still young, so he doesn't have a set picture of how people should interact, how dragons should be treated or anything. And he just looks at everything from kind of a bit of a childish view, but also he's really intelligent. And so he comes to quite a few conclusions about how humans treat each other, how humans treat animals and dragons and other things. And he makes quite a few good arguments with his handler, Lawrence, and just basically gets him to think about everything, which is something I really enjoyed. So yeah, if you have any interest in dragons and historical settings as well, I mean, there's not really magic happening in this book, but it's quite a nice setting anyway, I think. And the dragons are basically the main fantastical element in this case. But if that sounds like something that you would be interested in, I can only recommend reading this series. I'm definitely continuing on, of course. I have 2 more books already here, so that's obviously something that I want to continue. And I'm hoping that this will stay as good as it is. And if it does, it might be one of my new favorite series of all times. Well, I'm being hopeful anyways. So this is the second book done of this year. Let's just tick all the boxes that we need for it as well. Of course, for that we need to start all the way at the beginning at my goal overview page. And this is a physical book that I own, so I don't only get to tick off that I read a second book, but also that I read a first physical book, of course. And going on to my bookshelves, you will notice that I don't have to put the title in because this is a book that I own. So this is on the new page because I actually got the first 4 books of this series as a Christmas present from my family. So I'm quite happy that I will be able to continue whenever I get around to it. And so I will color this in on this page right here. And I've read the first book before I got it, so that's like this light color that will stick around for that as well. Next we get to the bingos, of course, and for this one I had to have quite a bit of a read, but in the end I decided to just go for the page count version because this was 355 pages, so that falls right in the middle of 300 to 400 pages, and this is the square that this book goes in. And on the second bingo board, I again had to think about it a little bit. I could have put it in the dragon square, but in the end I decided I will surely read at least the third book this year as well, so I'll keep that open for the dragons. And as this one had a lot of traveling by ship, I decided to put it on traveling by boat or ship instead, which is probably harder to get for all the reads that I have still planned in this year. So there we go. Bingo's set up nicely. And this time, because it's actually a physical book that I read, I also get to put in the cover as one of my monthly goals, because of course this is the physical book that I read in January, the physical owned book that I read in January. And on this page I do want to have it quite colorful. I'm too lazy to print out all the covers again, because I can only print out on sticker paper in like whole A4 sheets, and I don't want to have to plan this far ahead, and I can't plan this far ahead because I'm a mood reader. So I actually just want to draw them in a color that fits the cover and have a colorful page like that. So that's quite good. We're almost set up. We don't have to do anything for the collections. I'm still thinking about how to do the animal collections, and I think that will take a bit longer before I actually get into that. But I won't forget it. I don't forget animals anyway. So let's head on to our alphabet challenges. And for the author, it's quite easy because Naomi Novik obviously belongs into the N field. And for the title, I chose to use the Jade. So go for J, because that is probably less likely to find in a title than Throne or T. So finally, we get to update my series tracker. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of books to go on after this, so I'm excited. Let's move on to book number 3. I actually finished this one right after book number 2, just because it's an audiobook and I like to have maybe like one audiobook going each month. I'm not the greatest fan. Most things I do like to actually read with my eyes rather than just listen to it, but there are some stories that the library only has an audiobook, and I've started to like listening to audiobooks when I go out for a walk or when I do my knitting and crocheting projects. So it's quite nice, and it's become more of a regular thing for me these days. So the book that we're setting up the page for this time is Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. And that was quite an experience, to be honest, because I wasn't expecting it to be exactly what it is, basically. So I was expecting a nice YA romance story, kind of, that's not too deep and doesn't have too many difficult topics in it, maybe. But I was quite surprised to see how deep the book actually went. And before we get really into the contents of the books, let's just talk about this page for a second. I always try to have the pages look somewhat like the book cover because I just like the aesthetic, but I don't have that many washi tapes and I don't have that many colors. So sometimes I end up having to choose like the violet one with the flowers, in this case, something that doesn't fit too well with the book. But I don't think it's too bad, and in the end it's just trying to make it look nice for my own journal, so I'm okay with it. Anyways, it is partly quite a dark book, and I wasn't quite expecting that, but it was a really good book, and it was really fun to read and listen to, and I enjoyed having the experience for sure. Basically, we follow a girl named Frances who is in her final years at school and has always been getting really good grades, and so she thinks that the only right thing to do is obviously to apply to a really good university and just go there to study. That has been her goal for the whole time as she was in school, and so it's just basically she's sure that that's what she will do. But on the side, she really likes to draw, and she does a lot of fan art for her favorite podcast, which is a YouTube podcast, which is called Universe City, by a guy called Radio Silence, hence the name of the book. And basically, as she continues
going on through her final years at school. And as she meets the guy that lives across the street from her, Elliot, who likes similar things that she likes, and they get along quite well, but he doesn't like studying as much as she does, I guess. And then when she gets a message from Radio Silence asking her to do the official art for the podcast, her life changes quite a lot, and she has a whole summer that feels like living a lot more than the whole school and studying was feeling for her. So that's when she starts to realize that maybe that's not the best path for her to take. And as we continue on the journey, we get to know a few more characters that also take part in the school class and also have to decide whether to go to university, whether to find a job, what to do with their lives. And basically, it's about friendship and figuring out what you want in life and being there for people that are having a hard time, or also about how many people actually don't have it as easy at home as you might think. So it was quite an interesting ride to listen along to those 10 hours, and I enjoyed it. It's not the greatest book I've ever listened to, but for what it's trying to do, I think it did that really well, and hence I gave it the 4 stars. So yeah, if you like stories about growing up, figuring out what to do with your life, and friendships as well as hard times and getting through them together, I think this is really a nice little book. So maybe pick it up if that's something you're interested in. And let's of course also go ahead and put this book into all the different tracking pages that it fits into. It does count as another read book, so let me tick it off here before putting it on my unowned bookshelf, because as I said, I got this book from the library and it was quite a nice find as well. As I did read it in audio version, I will put it in a very light blue. I'm not sure if you can actually tell the difference too much here on video, but it is a different color, I promise. So let's move on to the bingo pages, where I did have to think about it a little bit, where I could put this story, because it didn't feel that romantic that I wanted to put it down as romance. Instead, I chose to put it down as a standalone book, because that is definitely what it is. And moving on to the second bingo, again, I had to think about it a little bit, but in the end, I decided modern setting is definitely fitting because it plays about 10 years ago, and there's obviously YouTube and social media, so that feels really modern, and it's playing in this world as well, which is how I kind of define this. So there we go. 2 bingo spaces down and a lot more to go for sure. This time we can also add something to my country collection. The last 2 books were both written by Americans, so I can only put down 1 flag for them, of course. But this one is by an English author, and you will notice that I didn't put down the UK flag, but I rather wanted to separate England, Scotland, and Wales so that I can put them down separately as well. So England is down, and our author Alice Oseman goes down as A, while we can put down the title as R for Radio Silence. And that's it for this book, because it's not part of a series or anything else that I could put it down as. And for the magazine that I read, since I only just finished it within the month of January, I put in a very small page as well, but I didn't film myself doing it, because I have to say that this is probably a very niche magazine and not too many people would be interested in reading it. I did pick it up at a conference when I was doing software architecture for work. So for that purpose it was quite good, but also it's very short and the articles are very short. So it was an easy read on the side, but it didn't have that much to offer, so that I wouldn't necessarily buy it if I don't get it at a conference. Anyways, that's the first magazine, and with that we're done with the focus points
of this month. So let us go ahead and have a view through the first pages of my book, if I can get there. Since magazines do count as books, in my goal of reading 60 different books this year, I have ticked off the first 5 boxes of this goal, which is going really well so far. And I have achieved my monthly goals of reading 1 physically owned book and 1 magazine. I also did some progress on my quarterly goals, as I did finish a series this month, so that's looking quite good. We're gonna have to go ahead and do the other 2 goals in the coming 2 months. So 3 of the books that I read up here were not owned by me, so they're on this shelf. You can find the first magazine colored in, and here on my new books shelf I have also colored in the owned book that I read. In terms of the bingo pages, I have 4 squares filled in each of them. As you can tell, I'm doing quite well on the D row because that's the different series types, and I read quite a bit of series this month, so that's quite nice to start out with. And in the themes bingo, it's a bit more spread out overall, but that's totally fine because it's the first month, so it's gonna fill up nicely, I'm sure. Then, looking at my monthly and quarterly goals in detail, I have put in the book and the magazine that I read in January, and I also put in the series that I finished for my quarterly goal. Looking good so far. And now I have something new to show you, because I did take the time and sat down and started drawing some animals. So I put in the 2 countries that I read books from, which is different authors, and I also finally started my animal collection with Temeraire, the dragon from A Throne of Jade, and also with Esa, which is the cat of Alucard from the Shades of Magic series. So I didn't want to film drawing these 2 because I'm not that confident about my drawing, but I think they're looking nice enough so that I'm happy with them. And let's see how we can fill up this page. Also, because I read 2 books by the same author, V.E. Schwab, I only have 3 authors in here, but 4 titles, and there's still a lot of space, of course, to go for my alphabet challenge. And finally, in terms of my series tracker, I did finish the Shades of Magic series, so I ticked it off over here, and that is quite a nice start to the year for myself, and we'll see what comes next. So, let us look at my setup for February and what will come next. I've already set up the tracking page for my February reads because I've started a next book on the last of January, and that's why I already wanted to set it up here so that I can start tracking it right away. That is this lovely little guy, which is a German book that I picked up at a little convention for smaller German authors here in my city. One of the authors that was visiting here is actually part of these little stories, and the thing that I really enjoyed about getting this book is that there are a few different short stories by different German authors. They're mostly writing sci-fi or fantasy, and that sounded really interesting because that gives me an option to try out a few German authors and see which ones I like. So, well, I only started reading the first 2 stories, so I'm not going to say too much about it, but you will hear more in February when I've finished with it. This is plan number 1. Plan number 2 looks a bit more chunky and definitely is going to have quite a bit of reading for me. I've already requested the second part in the library, and the hold is just 2 or 3 weeks away from being ready for me. So that's why I decided to pick up the first book in this series again, Gideon the Ninth, which I read in 2020 or something like that. and I don't remember it in enough detail that I want to continue the series just like that. So I'm gonna reread this book, which is gonna be my reread for Q1, and then I will continue with this series in the next few weeks. Not sure, probably not all of them this month, but at least I'm getting it started. And finally, I also want to get a bit back into my wildlife girl era and read more about animals and nature as well. So the magazine that I've planned for February is from the World Wildlife Fund and is basically about all kinds of different animals and conservation news. So I'm looking forward to that. So while this is all that I can show you in my journal, I also have one more plan that's going to be really interesting and that I will talk about more in February, which is that I'm planning to do my own little reading challenge. And that one is going to be for just 3 months as a little spring reading challenge, because I know that there's a lot of yearly reading challenges and so many books that you need to read for most of them. And I don't like having to plan ahead for each single month just to be sure that I can fit the books into the reading challenges and the prompts here and the prompts there. And as you can see, I usually read about 4 or 5 books a month, and that doesn't leave me that many options to choose books that will fit in most reading challenges, which is why I've decided to do a challenge that is a bit more library friendly. So if I have 3 months to do the challenge in, that means I can use a lot more books from the library, because often they have a few weeks of holding time until they become available. And that just helps me out. So I'm setting up the Herbologist Society's Spring Reading Challenge, which is going to be about growing different types of flowers and preparing them for potion making in future challenges. And it's going to be 3 months long, and it will require you to read at least 6 or maybe 8 books, which I think is a nice number so that a lot more people can join in and achieve it if they want to. And also, I will set the following challenge up so that if you didn't get all the flowers or didn't get so many of all the flowers, it's not going to be a problem, and you can still continue on with the next challenge and have fun with a nice little story there too. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in, think about subscribing, and I hope I'll see you in my next video where I will tell you more about this upcoming challenge. Have a nice day and see you next time.